I stood on the balcony of our penthouse apartment, the city lights of Chicago twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. A cool breeze whispered past, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and life, but in my ears, all I could hear was the steady, rhythmic beat of my own heart. It was a traitorous heart, still capable of fluttering when Julian wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, his chin resting gently on my shoulder. Thinking about the big day, my love. He murmured, his voice a low, smooth melody that had once been the only music I ever wanted to hear. I leaned back into his embrace, a practiced, familiar gesture that had become my greatest performance. 10 years, I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound wistful, perhaps a little odd. Can you believe it's been 10 years, Julian? The best 10 years of my life, Clara, he answered, his lips brushing against my temple. And tomorrow, we get to celebrate it with everyone. A party to end all parties. You deserve nothing less. I smiled, a perfect, serene smile I had spent years perfecting. It was the smile of a contented wife, a woman who had everything she could ever want. It was a complete and utter lie. Tomorrow was our 10th wedding anniversary. Julian had planned a lavish celebration at the most exclusive ballroom in the city. He had overseen every detail, from the 5-course menu prepared by a celebrity chef to the French champagne that would flow like water, to the 10-piece orchestra that would play our favorite songs. He had, of course, used my money to pay for it all, my inheritance. The fortune my father had painstakingly built from the ground up, the legacy he had entrusted to me, his only daughter. Julian saw the party as the ultimate symbol of our success, a testament to his status as the husband of Clara Sterling, the woman who had seamlessly merged her family's manufacturing empire with his supposed business acumen. But for me, the party was something else entirely. It was not a celebration. It was a reckoning. It was the final act of a very long, very painful play, and tomorrow night, the curtain would finally fall on my husband's decade-long deception. For 10 years, I had stayed quiet. For 3,652 days, I had played the part of the adoring, slightly naive, and endlessly generous wife. I had watched as he skillfully embedded himself into my life, my company, and my finances, all under the guise of love and partnership. I had listened to his sweet words and ignored the dissonant clang of my own intuition. I had smiled and nodded while he treated my inheritance like his personal piggy bank. He believed he had married me for my money. And he was right. He had. He just didn't know that for the past 4 years, I had been meticulously planning the terms of our separation. He thought tomorrow's party was for him. He had no idea that every bottle of champagne, every ice sculpture, and every one of the 300 guests was a carefully chosen prop for his public downfall. Is everything all right, darling? Julian's voice broke through my thoughts. He turned me around to face him, his brow furrowed with that look of feigned concern he had mastered so well. You seem a million miles away. I brought my hand up to cup his cheek, my fingers tracing the handsome lines of his jaw. He was still a striking man. The silver at his temples only added to his distinguished charm, a charm that had disarmed board members, clients, and, for a time, me. I was just thinking about our wedding day, I lied smoothly. How happy I was. How sure I was that our life together would be perfect. A genuine smile lit up his face, the kind that reached his eyes and made him look, for a fleeting moment, like the man I thought I had married. It is perfect, Clara. We are perfect. He kissed me then, a deep, possessive kiss that tasted of expensive whiskey and secrets. I kissed him back, pouring every ounce of my duplicity into the act. It had to be believable. Everything depended on him believing, right until the very last second, that I was still his fool. As he held me, I let my mind drift back, not to our wedding day, but to the first crack in the flawless facade he had built around us. It wasn't a dramatic, earth-shattering moment. It was a quiet conversation, a small seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of my subconscious. It was about a year into our marriage. We were in my father's old study, a room I had preserved just as he left it. Julian was looking at a portfolio of my personal investments, ones my father had set up for me years ago. You know, sweetheart, he had said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a column of figures. This portfolio is safe. It's reliable, but it's not growing at the rate it could be. Your father was a brilliant industrialist, but a conservative investor. He always said it's better to sleep well than to eat well, I had replied, quoting one of my father's favorite aphorisms. Julian had laughed, a soft, indulgent sound. And he was right for his time, but the market is different now, more aggressive. There are opportunities he wouldn't have dreamed of. Let me manage this for you. I could double these returns in a year. Think of what we could do with that extra capital. Expand the company, travel the world in style. I had hesitated. That money was my safety net, a separate entity from the business, a final gift from my father. It felt sacred. I don't know, Julian. My financial advisor, Mr. Hemlock, has managed it for years. He was Dad's most trusted man. Julian had closed the folder and walked over to me, taking my hands in his. His gaze was earnest, his touch gentle. Clara, my love, we are husband and wife. A team. Your success is my success. Why would you trust a paid employee more than you trust me? Don't you believe I have your best interests at heart? And there it was. The first time he had used our marriage, our supposed love, as leverage in a financial discussion. It was subtle, a masterful stroke of emotional manipulation. He wasn't questioning my business sense, he was questioning my faith in him, in our relationship. To refuse would be to admit a flicker of doubt, to create a distance I wasn't ready to acknowledge, so I had relented. Of course, I trust you, I had said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. All right, you can manage the portfolio. I fired Mr. Hemlock the next day. I still remember the look of disappointment on his kind, elderly face. He had known me since I was a little girl. Are you certain about this, Clara? He had asked, his eyes full of a warning I was not yet ready to heed. Your father established these trusts, with very specific instructions for their protection. Julian is my husband, Mr. Hemlock. He will protect my interests, I had replied, the words sounding more like a desperate hope than a statement of fact. Within 18 months, the entire portfolio was gone. Julian had sunk the money into a series of high-risk tech startups and speculative real estate ventures. Some had collapsed entirely. Others were shell corporations I would later discover were registered to his estranged brother in the Cayman Islands. When I confronted him, his distress seemed so genuine. He held me as I cried, not for the lost money, but for the loss of that tangible connection to my father. I'm so sorry, Clara, he had whispered, his voice thick with what I mistook for remorse. I was too aggressive. I wanted to impress you, to show you what I could do for us. I promise I will make it all back, every single penny. We still have the company. We are still strong. I had forgiven him. I had comforted him. I had believed his tears and his promises. Looking back now, from the precipice of our 10th anniversary, I realized that was the moment he knew he had won. He had tested the boundaries, and I had failed to enforce them. He had taken something precious from me, and my response had been to soothe his supposed guilt. He had learned that I would absorb any financial loss to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage. He had learned that my love was a weakness he could exploit again and again, and he did. Come on, Julian's voice pulled me back to the present, to the chilly air on the balcony. Let's go inside. You need your beauty sleep. Tomorrow is a big day. I allowed him to lead me back into the warmth of our apartment, an opulent cage I had gilded myself. As I prepared for bed, going through the motions of our nightly routine, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. There was no more anger, no more grief. Those emotions had burned themselves out years ago, leaving behind only the cold, hard clarity of purpose. Julian fell asleep within minutes, his breathing deep and even beside me. He slept the untroubled sleep of a man who believed he was untouchable. I lay awake, staring into the darkness, and I began to plan my speech for the following evening. Every word had to be perfect. Every pause, every inflection had to be calibrated for maximum impact. Tomorrow, I would not be speaking as Clara Sterling, the loving wife. I would be speaking as Clara Sterling, the chief executive officer of Sterling Industries and the sole architect of his demise. And I would enjoy every single moment of it. The morning of our anniversary dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn day. Julian was in high spirits, humming as he knotted his silk tie, his reflection in the mirror showing a man utterly pleased with his world. He presented me with a gift, a ridiculously large blue diamond necklace. "A drop of the ocean for my ocean of love," he said, fastening the clasp at the nape of my neck. The stones were cold against my skin. "It's beautiful, Julian," I said, my voice a soft whisper. I knew, without a doubt, that he had purchased it through a corporate account, classifying it as a client relations expense. It was a gift from me to me, with a fraudulent paper trail. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. I gave him his gift in return. A limited edition Patek Philippe watch, one he had been coveting for months. His eyes lit up with a greedy, childlike glee that was far more genuine than his declarations of love. As he strapped it to his wrist, admiring the intricate face, I felt a pang of something that resembled pity. He was, at his core, a simple creature, driven by a desperate need for the trappings of wealth he felt he was owed. He had no idea that the watch, like the necklace, was a piece of evidence. I had the original receipts, the bank statements showing which of my accounts he had used, all neatly filed away in a vault he didn't know existed. The day passed in a blur of final preparations. Florists, caterers, and musicians paraded through our apartment. Julian flitted between them, issuing orders with the air of a grand conductor, while I remained in the background, the serene, supportive benefactor. My only contribution was to personally call a select few guests to confirm their attendance. One was Mr. Hemlock, my father's old financial advisor. He was long retired, but we had reconnected 4 years ago when the first whispers of my suspicion became too loud to ignore. He had been the one to recommend the forensic accountant who had untangled the web of Julian's deceit. "Clara, my dear girl," his voice crackled over the phone. "Are you sure about this? A public spectacle can be a messy affair." "It has to be this way, Arthur," I told him, using his first name as I had since I was a child. "For 10 years, he has built a reputation on my name and my family's legacy. He has used my company's success to portray himself as a brilliant businessman. I need to dismantle that reputation in the same arena he built it. I need witnesses." "I understand," he said with a heavy sigh. "I will be there." "Your father would be, well, he would be furious that it came to this, but he would be immensely proud of the woman you've become." His words fortified me. Another call was to a man named Marcus Thorne, the head of the white-collar crime division at the district attorney's office. He was an old family friend, a man who had gone fishing with my father. I had met with him in secret 6 months prior, laying out the preliminary findings of my investigation. "The documents are all in order, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice low. "My attorney will have the complete package delivered to your office by messenger at 9 p.m. tonight. It will corroborate everything we discussed." "We'll be ready, Clara," he confirmed. "Are you certain you don't want a team standing by at the hotel?" "No," I said firmly. "This is not about a dramatic arrest. This is about a controlled demolition. I need him to be served with the civil lawsuit and the divorce papers at the party. The humiliation is part of the process. The criminal charges can wait until Monday morning. Let him have 1 weekend of pure, unadulterated panic." My final call was to Beatrice, my oldest friend. She was the only one who had dared to question my choice of husband from the very beginning. "Bea, are you ready for the show?" I asked. "Ready?" She snorted. "I have been rehearsing my standing ovation for 4 years. I have a dress that screams 'I told you so,' and I cannot wait to see the look on that leech's face when you lower the boom. Just promise me one thing." "Anything." "When you're done, don't look at him. Look at me. I'll have a glass of champagne waiting for you, the good stuff. From your private cellar, not the swill he ordered for the masses." I laughed, a real genuine laugh that felt like a release. "It's a deal." As evening approached, I began my transformation. A team of stylists Julian had hired descended upon me, fussing over my hair and makeup. I had chosen my dress months ago. It was a column of deep crimson silk, elegant, severe, and unforgettable. It was the color of power, the color of spilled wine, the color of a balance sheet written in red ink. When I was finally ready, I stood before the full-length mirror and saw a stranger looking back. The woman in the glass was not the soft, accommodating Clara of the past decade. Her eyes held a glint of steel, her posture was erect, her expression unreadable. She was a queen on the verge of a coup, and I was finally ready to let her take control. Julian walked in and his breath caught. "Clara, my God, you look breathtaking." He walked toward me, his eyes devouring me in the crimson dress. "Absolutely regal. Tonight, everyone will know that you are my queen." "And you are my king," I replied, the words dripping with a saccharine sweetness that made me want to gag. He offered me his arm, and together we walked out of our apartment and toward the waiting limousine, toward our final performance. The ride to the hotel was silent. Julian was practically vibrating with excitement, lost in visions of the grand figure he would cut tonight. I, on the other hand, was a pool of perfect calm. I ran through the key points of my speech one last time in my head. I thought of my father, of his legacy, of the trust I had so carelessly betrayed and so painstakingly reclaimed. When we arrived, the ballroom was already alive with the buzz of conversation and the clinking of glasses. 300 of the city's most influential people were there. Bankers, politicians, artists, and socialites. All of them knew me as Clara Sterling, Julian's quiet, wealthy wife. By the end of the night, they would know me as something else entirely. Julian was in his element, gliding through the crowd, accepting congratulations, his hand possessively at the small of my back. I smiled and nodded, playing my part to perfection. I saw Beatrice across the room, and she gave me a subtle, encouraging nod. I saw Arthur Hemlock standing by the bar, his expression grim but supportive. An hour into the festivities, the orchestra leader tapped his baton and the room quieted. Julian led me to the small stage at the front of the room, his arm tight around my waist. He picked up a microphone, his face beaming. "Friends, family, colleagues," he began, his voice resonating with practiced warmth. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this incredible milestone. 10 years. 10 years with the most beautiful, most generous, most supportive woman a man could ever hope to have by his side." He paused and looked at me, his eyes full of what the room would see as adoration. I knew it was the look of a predator admiring his prize. "When I met Clara," he continued, "I was just a man with a dream. She was the one who gave me the wings to fly. Her belief in me, her unwavering support, and yes, her resources allowed us to build an empire together. Every success I have had, I owe to her. She is my partner, my muse, my entire world. And so, I want to propose a toast. To my darling Clara, the love of my life, may the next 10 years be even more prosperous and full of love than the last." A chorus of "To Clara" echoed through the room as everyone raised their glasses. I smiled demurely, my heart beating a steady, lethal rhythm. Now it was my turn. Julian handed me the microphone, his hand squeezing mine. "Say something, my love," he whispered. "Tell them how happy you are." I stepped forward, the crimson silk of my dress whispering around my ankles. The spotlight was warm on my face. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, and then I looked directly at my husband. "Thank you, Julian," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. "That was a beautiful speech. And it's true, you were a man with a dream. But I think it's time everyone in this room understood the true nature of that dream." I saw a flicker of confusion in Julian's eyes. The crowd murmured softly, sensing a shift in the celebratory mood. For 10 years, I have stood by this man, not just as his wife, but as his financier, his benefactor, his one-woman venture capital fund, and I have done so quietly. But tonight, on this very special anniversary, I feel it's time to finally break my silence and present my husband with a gift of truth. I turned to Julian, whose smile was now frozen on his face. "You spoke of prosperity, my dear. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the $47 million you have systematically siphoned from Sterling Industries over the past 8 years through a network of shell corporations, one of which is conveniently registered to your brother in Nassau." A collective gasp went through the room. Julian's face had gone from confused to a sickly pale white. He reached for my arm, but I stepped away, turning my attention back to the stunned audience. Let's talk about the sale of the company's real estate assets in the West Loop, which you sold to a holding company you secretly controlled for 30% below market value, netting yourself a tidy $7 million personal profit. A profit you declared as a consulting fee on a tax return I'm sure the IRS would be very interested to see. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I could see people shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me and Julian, who now looked like a trapped animal. And let's talk about generosity. You were right. I have been generous. I was so generous, in fact, that I funded the purchase of a lovely condominium in Miami for a young woman named Tiffany, a budding actress, I believe. The same condominium where you spent 2 weeks last month, while I thought you were at a manufacturing conference in Germany. You see, I was also generous enough to hire a private investigator who took the most wonderful photographs of your trip. I've included a few in the gift bags for our guests tonight. Panic was now radiating from Julian in waves. He grabbed for the microphone, but my hand was like a vice. "Clara, what are you doing?" He hissed, his voice a frantic whisper. "Stop this, you're drunk." "On the contrary, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm level, yet still carrying through the silent ballroom. "For the first time in 10 years, I am completely sober. I see everything with perfect clarity." I looked out at the crowd again. I saw Beatrice, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. I saw Arthur Hemlock, his expression one of solemn vindication. This party, this beautiful, extravagant party, was Julian's idea. He wanted to celebrate 10 years of what he considered his greatest achievement. And in a way, I agree, it is an achievement. It takes a special kind of dedication to lie to someone every single day for a decade. It takes a particular talent to steal from the person who has given you everything. So, Julian, I suppose I should thank you. You have given me a very expensive, very painful education in the art of deception. I let the microphone drop from my hand. It hit the stage with a loud thud that echoed in the dead silence of the room. At that exact moment, as if on cue, 2 well-dressed men entered from the back of the ballroom. One was my lawyer, Mr. Harding, the other was a process server. They walked directly to the stage. "Julian Croft," Mr. Harding said, his voice void of all emotion. "You are being served." He handed Julian a thick manila envelope. "These are divorce papers citing financial fraud and infidelity. And this," he handed him a second, even thicker envelope, "is a civil lawsuit for the recovery of $82 million in misappropriated funds, damages, and punitive penalties. All of your personal and shared assets have been frozen by a court order, effective immediately." Julian stared at the papers in his hand, as if they were venomous snakes. His face, which had been pale, was now slick with sweat. His perfect facade had not just cracked, it had been utterly obliterated. I turned my back on him. I did not want to see his collapse. I walked to the edge of the stage, down the small set of stairs, and into the stunned crowd. People parted for me as if I were royalty. I kept my head held high, my gaze fixed forward, until I found Beatrice. Just as she had promised, she was holding a glass of champagne. She handed it to me, her eyes shining with pride. "To Clara Sterling," she said, her voice loud enough for those around us to hear. "The smartest, bravest woman I know." I took a long, slow sip of the champagne. It was crisp, cold, and tasted of glorious, hard-won freedom. The life I had known was over. The battle was just beginning. But for the first time in a very long time, I was no longer silent. And I was finally, truly, on my own side. The orchestra remained silent, their instruments held in a state of suspended animation. The hum of shocked whispers grew into a low roar, a wave of scandal washing over the opulent ballroom. I saw people leaning into each other, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, horror, and a kind of delicious, vicarious thrill. A few were surreptitiously opening the small, elegant gift bags we had placed at every seat. I could imagine their discovery. A small, engraved silver frame holding not a picture of the happy couple, but a glossy 8x10 of Julian and his lover, Tiffany, laughing on a Miami balcony, the sun glinting off the blue Atlantic behind them. It was a perfect picture of betrayal. That, Beatrice said, her voice low and brimming with admiration, was the most brutally elegant thing I have ever witnessed. It was like watching someone perform open-heart surgery with a diamond scalpel. I managed a small, tight smile. The adrenaline was a fierce current in my veins, keeping me upright, keeping my hand steady as I held the champagne flute. My entire body felt strangely light, hollowed out by the sheer force of the confession I had held inside for so long. Across the room, I saw the fallout continuing. Julian, who had been frozen on the stage, was now a vortex of frantic energy. He was flipping through the legal documents, his face contorting in a mask of rage and disbelief. His lawyer, a man named Peterson, whom I knew he kept on a hefty retainer paid for by my company, was rushing toward the stage, his own expression one of utter bewilderment. My victory was a fragile, momentary thing. I knew I had to leave. My purpose had been served. The truth was out, unleashed in a room full of the most influential gossips in Chicago. The narrative was no longer Julian's to control. "We should go," Arthur Hemlock said, appearing at my other side. His presence was a comforting anchor of stability. "My driver is waiting at the service entrance. It will be more private." I nodded, handing my barely touched glass of champagne back to Beatrice. "Thank you, Arthur." But leaving wasn't going to be that simple. Julian had spotted me. With a guttural roar of fury, he launched himself off the stage, shoving a bewildered guest aside as he charged toward me. The crowd shrank back, creating a sudden, dramatic clearing around us. "Clara," he bellowed, his voice raw and stripped of all its practiced charm. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin like claws. "You will not do this to me. You will not walk out of here after humiliating me in front of everyone we know." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. His eyes were wild, the handsome mask completely gone, revealing the snarling desperation beneath. I felt nothing. No fear, no pain, just a profound and final sense of detachment. "Let go of me, Julian," I said, my voice quiet, almost conversational, yet it cut through his rage like ice. "You've gone insane." He spat, his face inches from mine. Completely hysterical. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, turning to the gawking crowd, "I apologize for my wife's behavior. She hasn't been well. She's confused, she's been under a great deal of stress. She doesn't know what she's saying." It was a classic, textbook attempt to discredit me, to paint me as the unstable woman, the mad wife in the attic. But I had anticipated it. I had spent 4 years anticipating every possible move he could make. "Confused," I repeated, my voice still dangerously calm. "No, Julian, I'm not the one who will be confused tomorrow morning when he finds his corporate credit cards have been declined. I'm not the one who will be confused when he discovers his access to the Sterling Industries servers has been revoked. And I am certainly not the one who will be confused when he tries to pay his lawyer with money that no longer exists." Arthur stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Julian's shoulder. "Mr. Croft, I strongly advise you to release Mrs. Sterling. Hotel security has been notified of your frozen assets and are on their way to escort you from the premises to prevent any further disruption." Julian's head whipped around to look at Arthur, his eyes wide with the realization that this was not a spontaneous outburst, but a coordinated, multi-pronged attack. "You," he sneered at Arthur. "You were always a little worm, loyal to her father's memory. You helped her with this." "I helped my client protect her assets from a predator," Arthur corrected him smoothly. "Now, I will say it one last time. Let her go." Julian's grip on my arm tightened for a painful second before he shoved me away from him. I stumbled back a step, and Beatrice was instantly there, her arm looping through mine to steady me. "You will regret this, Clara," Julian snarled, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss meant only for me. "You have no idea what you've just started. I will fight you. I will drag you through the mud until there is nothing left of your precious family name." "My name is Sterling, Julian," I said, meeting his hateful gaze without flinching. "It has survived world wars, recessions, and the death of its founder. I assure you it will survive you. Your name, however, is Croft, and by morning it will be synonymous with fraud, infidelity, and pathetic desperation. Enjoy your party." With that, I turned my back on him for the last time. Flanked by Beatrice and Arthur, I began my walk of liberation. It was the longest walk of my life. The whispers followed us, a sibilant tide of shock and speculation. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on my back, but I did not falter. I kept my chin up, my shoulders back, my steps measured and even. I was not fleeing a scene, I was making an exit. As we passed the grand entrance to the ballroom, I saw Mr. Harding, my lawyer, speaking quietly with two uniformed security guards, pointing discreetly toward the stage where Julian stood, a man alone in the wreckage of his own making. The machine I had set in motion was working perfectly. We bypassed the main elevators and followed Arthur through a door marked "Staff Only." The sudden transition from the gilded opulence of the hotel to the stark, fluorescent-lit functionality of the service corridor was jarring. The air here was colder, smelling of disinfectant and cooking oil. The distant strains of the silenced orchestra were replaced by the hum of industrial refrigerators. It was the unglamorous backstage of the life I had just publicly dismantled. We said nothing as we navigated the maze of corridors. There was nothing to say. The deed was done. The silence was heavy with unspoken emotions, with the sheer magnitude of what had just transpired. Arthur's driver, a stoic man named Thomas, was waiting for us by a loading dock, the engine of a sleek black sedan humming quietly in the cool night air. He opened the back door for me, and I slid onto the plush leather seat. Beatrice got in beside me, her presence a silent, unwavering pillar of support. Arthur leaned in before closing the door. "I will handle the press," he said. "A statement has already been prepared. It will be released to the major news outlets in 1 hour. It will be concise, professional, and it will corroborate everything you said. Go home, Clara, get some rest. Tomorrow, the real work begins." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice finally tinged with the exhaustion that was beginning to seep through the adrenaline. "For everything." He simply nodded, his eyes kind, and closed the door. As the car pulled away from the curb and merged into the river of city traffic, I allowed myself to look back just once. The hotel towered over us, a monument of glittering windows and Art Deco stonework. Inside, on the 12th floor, was a ballroom filled with the ruins of my marriage. It looked so beautiful and peaceful from the outside. No one would guess at the demolition that had just occurred within its walls. Beatrice reached over and took my hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. "You did it," she said softly. "You actually did it." "I did," I whispered, the reality of it finally starting to sink in. I had detonated my life. I had burned the bridge and salted the earth. I had done it in front of 300 people. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone shifting from triumphant to concerned. I thought about the question for a long moment, watching the familiar streetlights of Chicago slide past the window. Was I okay? I had just publicly destroyed my husband, initiated a brutal legal battle, and turned my private life into a public spectacle. My future was a terrifying landscape of courtrooms, depositions, and tabloid headlines. "No," I said, and the honesty of the word was a relief. "But I will be." For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I had long forgotten. Hope. It was a small, fragile flame in the vast emptiness of my new reality, but it was there. And for tonight, it was more than enough. The car sped through the night, carrying me away from the life I had endured and toward the one I would now have to build from the ashes. We didn't go back to the penthouse. I could never sleep in that bed again, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 lies. Instead, Thomas drove us to a discreet 5-star hotel where Arthur had booked me a suite under a false name. It was a quiet, anonymous space, devoid of memories. Beatrice insisted on staying with me, refusing to leave my side until she was sure I wouldn't crumble. She ordered a bottle of exorbitantly expensive scotch from room service, and we sat in silence for a while, two women in evening gowns in an impersonal hotel suite, the city's glow painting patterns on the ceiling. "What do you think he's doing right now?" Beatrice asked, breaking the quiet. I took a sip of the peaty, smoky scotch, letting it burn a clean line down my throat. "I imagine he's making phone calls," I said, my voice clinical. "Frantic ones, trying to find a lawyer who will take his case without a retainer, trying to move money that is no longer his to move, trying to spin a story to anyone who will listen. He will be casting himself as the victim, the loving husband betrayed by a mentally unstable wife. Will anyone believe him? Some will, I conceded. People believe what they want to believe. Some will see a powerful woman as inherently threatening. They will be more comfortable with the idea of me being crazy than of him being a conman. But it doesn't matter. The evidence is irrefutable. The legal case is airtight. Public opinion is a fickle beast, but court judgments are not. The truth has its own weight. I had learned that the hard way. For 4 years, I had lived under the crushing weight of Julian's truth, a reality built on a foundation of my money and his lies. Now, it was my turn to define reality. Beatrice got up and walked to the window, looking out at the panoramic view. I never understood, Clara. In the beginning, I mean, what did you ever see in him? The question was one she had never dared to ask so directly, and one I had spent countless hours asking myself. I stared into my glass at the way the amber liquid caught the light. I didn't see him, I said softly. I saw a reflection of what I wanted to see. I had just lost my father. I was 28 years old, suddenly in charge of a massive company, and I was lonely, so incredibly lonely. Julian came along and he was charming, attentive, and seemingly brilliant. He saw me, or so I thought. He didn't seem intimidated by my wealth or my position. He made me feel like a woman, not just an heiress or a CEO. I sighed, the memory still holding a dull ache. He was a blank canvas, and I painted a masterpiece on him. I wanted a partner, an equal, a lover. So I convinced myself that's what he was. I ignored the red flags because acknowledging them would have meant acknowledging that I was alone again. It was easier to believe the beautiful lie. We all do it, Beatrice said, turning from the window. We all paint canvases. Yours was just a hell of a lot more expensive than most. We fell into a comfortable silence again. The adrenaline had completely faded now, leaving a profound, bone-deep weariness in its place. I felt as though I had been holding my breath for a decade, and I had just now, finally, exhaled. Around 3 a.m., my phone, which had been silent, buzzed to life. It was a text from an unknown number. My heart gave a small, nervous jolt. I knew it was him. The message was short. You think you've won, you've destroyed everything. I hope you're happy alone with your money. It's all you'll ever have. I read the words and felt a surprising lack of emotion. There was no sting, no pain. He was wrong. I wasn't alone. I had Beatrice, snoring softly now on the suite's plush sofa. I had Arthur, a man of unwavering integrity. And for the first time, I had myself. My money wasn't a cold comfort, it was a tool. It was the armor that had protected me, the weapon that had allowed me to fight back. It was my father's legacy, and I had finally proven myself worthy of it. I deleted the message without replying. I turned off the phone and lay back against the pillows, closing my eyes. Sleep, for the first time in a very long time, came easily. The war was far from over, but the single most important battle had been won. I had reclaimed my own story. I awoke to the unfamiliar silence of the hotel suite, a silence that was a stark contrast to the storm that had erupted the night before. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, disoriented. Then it all came rushing back. The crimson dress, the cold microphone, the shattered look on Julian's face, the taste of champagne and freedom. A wave of nausea rolled through me, a visceral reaction to the emotional violence of the previous evening. It was one thing to plan a demolition in the abstract. It was another to stand in the rubble. Beatrice was already awake, sitting in an armchair by the window with a tablet in her hand and a grim expression on her face. A room service cart laden with coffee and pastries sat untouched beside her. "Good morning, Napoleon," she said without looking up. "Your scorched earth campaign has made the front page." She turned the tablet toward me. There it was, a major Chicago newspaper's online edition. The headline was sensational, written in a bold, accusatory font. "Sterling heiress accuses husband of massive fraud at lavish anniversary party." Below it was a grainy photo, clearly taken on a cell phone by one of the guests. It showed me on the stage, microphone in hand, with Julian in the background, his face a mask of horror. The image was blurry, but the drama it captured was crystal clear. My hands trembled slightly as I took the tablet from her. I scrolled through the article. It was a breathless account of the evening, quoting anonymous sources from the party. Words like shocking, brutal, and public takedown were used liberally. They had already printed excerpts from the official statement Arthur had released, which detailed the civil lawsuit and the grounds for divorce. The reporter had even managed to dig up a photo of Tiffany, the aspiring actress, from her social media, placing it alongside a photo of me. The comparison was a classic tabloid trope: the aging, powerful wife versus the young, carefree mistress. "They're painting me as a woman scorned," I murmured, a bitter taste in my mouth. A vengeful wife using her fortune to punish her cheating husband. "Of course they are," Beatrice said, finally pouring herself a cup of coffee. "It's a better story than competent CEO methodically gathers 4 years of evidence to oust a criminal from her company. One is a soap opera, the other is a business transaction. People always prefer the soap opera." She was right. The narrative was already being twisted. Julian's desperate, last-minute attempt to frame me as mentally unstable was finding fertile ground in the public imagination. I saw it in the online comments section below the article, a toxic swamp of speculation and misogyny. "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. He probably cheated, but she didn't have to ruin him like that. She sounds crazy, paranoid, all that money must have gone to her head. I feel bad for the husband. She probably treated him like an employee for 10 years and was shocked when he looked elsewhere for affection." The words were tiny daggers, each one a prick of the very prejudice I had fought to overcome my entire professional life. For a moment, my resolve wavered. The weight of public judgment felt immense, suffocating. Had I made a mistake? Had I played into their hands, giving them the exact spectacle they craved? "Don't read that trash," Beatrice commanded, seeing the look on my face. She took the tablet back and tossed it onto the sofa. "Clara, listen to me. Who cares what a bunch of anonymous idiots on the internet think? They don't matter. The board of directors at Sterling Industries matters. The district attorney's office matters. The judge who will preside over your divorce matters. And none of them give a damn about a comments section. They care about facts, evidence, and the bottom line. And you, my friend, have all three." Her words were a bracing slap of reality. She was right. This was not a popularity contest. It was a war, and it would be won in boardrooms and courtrooms, not in the court of public opinion. "You're right," I said, my voice firmer now. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. The city was laid out before me, a landscape of steel and glass, bathed in the clean, unforgiving light of morning. My city, my father's city. My company was down there, a vital part of its heartbeat. I need to get dressed. I have a meeting with Arthur and the legal team at 9. And then I'm going to the office. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "The office, today? Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I have to be," I said, turning to face her. "I've been an absentee CEO for too long, letting Julian play the part. My employees, my board, my investors, they all need to see who is in charge. They need to see that the company is stable. They need to see me." The fire that had fueled me last night was back, burning away the morning's doubt. The woman who had wept for a lost love was gone. The woman who had meticulously planned a corporate coup was back in her place. 2 hours later, I walked into the downtown offices of Harding, Wright, and Dunn. The contrast between my state of mind now and the first time I had walked through these doors 4 years ago was staggering. Then, I had been a woman trembling on the verge of a terrifying suspicion, clutching a handful of financial discrepancies like a dirty secret. Today, I was a general arriving at her command center. Arthur Hemlock was already there, along with Mr. Harding and a woman I recognized as Sarah Jenkins, the forensic accountant who had been my secret weapon. The conference room table was covered in neat stacks of files and binders, a testament to their tireless work. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and quiet competence. "Clara," Mr. Harding said, rising to greet me. He was a tall, unflappable man in his late 50s with eyes that missed nothing. You did well last night. It was a bold move, but a necessary one. You've seized control of the narrative. The morning papers seem to disagree, I said wryly, taking the seat he offered me. The papers want to sell copy, Sarah Jenkins interjected, her voice sharp and precise. We want to win a case. The evidence they don't have is what matters. She gestured to the binders on the table. And we have it all. For the next 3 hours, they walked me through the fortress of evidence we had built. It was even more damning than I had remembered. Sarah had created intricate flowcharts that traced my money from Sterling Industries accounts, through a labyrinth of domestic and offshore shell corporations, and finally to Julian's personal investments, luxury purchases, and the accounts he maintained for his mistress. His methodology was classic, Sarah explained, pointing to a particularly complex diagram. He'd inflate invoices from legitimate vendors, create phantom service companies that billed Sterling for work never performed, and authorize six-figure consulting fees to entities he secretly controlled. He was clever. He spread the fraud across dozens of small transactions, hoping to keep it below the radar of our annual audits. But he got greedy. The West Loop property deal was his biggest mistake, Harding added. The sheer audacity of it. He used his position as acting COO to approve the sale to a company, Croft Development Group, which we've proven is 100% owned by him. He used a forged appraisal to justify the low sale price. That alone is wire fraud, mail fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Marcus Thorne at the DA's office is particularly interested in that transaction. Listening to them dissect his crimes, I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as if they were talking about a stranger, a villain in a movie, not the man who had shared my bed for a decade. The man I had once loved. The betrayal was so vast, so clinical, it was almost impossible to process on an emotional level. What's his next move? I asked, forcing myself to focus on the strategic reality. His lawyer, Peterson, has already filed a motion to have the asset freeze lifted, Harding replied. He's claiming it's an illegal seizure of shared marital property and that Julian needs access to funds for his living expenses and legal defense. The judge will hear the motion on Friday. We will, of course, oppose it. We have the documentation to prove that virtually all of the shared marital property was purchased with stolen funds. He will also try to countersue, Arthur warned. For defamation, for emotional distress, he will try to paint you as the aggressor. It will be a tactic to drain your resources and your will to fight. My will is not in question, I said, my voice hard as stone. And my resources are considerably more substantial than his. We spent another hour planning our next steps, coordinating the timelines for the civil suit, the divorce proceedings, and the evidence we would continue to feed to the district attorney for the inevitable criminal case. By the time I left the law office, my head was spinning with legal jargon, but my purpose was clearer than ever. Instead of having Thomas take me back to the hotel, I gave him a different address, the headquarters of Sterling Industries. The iconic steel and glass tower my grandfather had built and my father had expanded. My birthright. As we pulled up to the entrance, I could see the buzz of activity. There were 2 news vans parked across the street, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like metallic vultures. A handful of reporters were loitering on the sidewalk, hoping for a quote. "Stay here, Thomas," I said. "I'll call you when I'm ready." I took a deep breath and got out of the car. The moment I stepped onto the pavement, the reporters swarmed me, a flurry of cameras and microphones. "Mrs. Sterling, is it true you're filing for divorce? Can you comment on the fraud allegations? Is the company financially stable?" I ignored them all. I held my head high and walked with measured steps toward the revolving doors of the building, my face a mask of serene indifference. The security guards in the lobby, men who had known me since I was a girl visiting my father, rushed to clear a path for me, their faces a mixture of surprise and concern. The lobby of Sterling Industries was a cavernous space of marble and mahogany, dominated by a bronze bust of my father. For years, I had walked past it, feeling like an unworthy successor. Today, I looked at his strong, unyielding face and felt a sense of kinship. I was his daughter, and I would not let his legacy be tarnished. The atmosphere in the lobby was electric with tension. Employees in the open-plan offices on the mezzanine level were standing by the glass partitions, shamelessly staring. The news had clearly spread through the company like wildfire. My executive assistant, a fiercely loyal and efficient woman named Maria, met me at the elevator bank. Her eyes were wide, but her voice was steady. "Mrs. Sterling, it's good to see you. We weren't expecting you." "There have been some changes, Maria," I said. "Please call an emergency meeting of the board of directors in the main conference room in 1 hour, and ask the heads of all major departments to join us." "Yes, ma'am," she said, already typing furiously into her phone. "And Mr. Croft's office. His access to this building, and to all company systems, has been terminated, effective immediately. Please coordinate with security to have his personal effects packed and delivered to Mr. Harding's office. He is no longer an employee of this company." "Consider it done," Maria said with a faint, satisfied smile. As the elevator ascended silently toward the executive floor, I felt the last vestiges of Clara, the victim, fall away. I was stepping into my father's shoes, but I was filling them with my own 2 feet. The next hour would be critical. I had to project strength, confidence, and absolute control. The future of my company depended on it. The executive floor was unnervingly quiet, a pocket of suspended reality in a building humming with rumor. As I walked down the long corridor toward the main conference room, I could feel the eyes of assistants and junior executives on me from their cubicles. They averted their gaze the moment I looked their way, but the curiosity was a palpable force. I was no longer just Mrs. Sterling, the quiet owner who occasionally sat in on meetings. I was the woman from the headlines, a figure of scandal and speculation. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to the conference room. The 10 members of the Sterling Industries Board of Directors were already seated around the vast mahogany table, a collection of solemn faces silhouetted against the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. The atmosphere was thick with tension and the unspoken questions that hung in the air like smoke. At the far end of the table, in the chair my father had always occupied, sat a placeholder, a bottle of water and an empty notepad. It was the seat Julian had used for the past 5 years, the seat from which he had projected an aura of command. I walked the length of the room, my heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the marble floor. I did not take one of the seats along the side. I walked directly to the head of the table, placed my leather portfolio on the polished surface, and sat down in his chair. It was a simple action, but it was a declaration. The throne was no longer usurped. I let the silence stretch for a moment, meeting the gaze of each person around the table. I saw familiar faces, like Bill Donovan, my father's oldest friend and our company's CFO, who gave me a subtle, supportive nod. I saw newer faces, men Julian had brought onto the board, like Robert Henderson, a venture capitalist with a reputation for aggressive tactics, whose expression was a careful mask of neutrality. "Good morning," I began, my voice even and devoid of emotion. It carried easily in the acoustically perfect room. "I'm sure you have all seen the news. I will not waste your time with denials or evasions. The stories are, in essence, true. Julian Croft has been removed from his position as Chief Operating Officer and has been terminated from this company for cause." A low murmur went through the room. I held up a hand to forestall any questions. "His termination is the result of a multi-year internal investigation, conducted with the help of independent forensic accountants and legal counsel. We have uncovered a systematic and sophisticated scheme of financial fraud perpetrated by Mr. Croft, resulting in the misappropriation of millions of dollars of corporate funds." I paused, letting the bluntness of the words sink in. Last night was not, as some news outlets are suggesting, an emotional outburst. It was a strategic necessity. It was the first step in a carefully planned legal and financial action to protect the assets and the integrity of this company. The company my father built and the company I own. I slid a thin file folder from my portfolio and pushed it to the center of the table. This is a preliminary summary of the findings, prepared by my legal team. It outlines the nature of the fraud and the steps we are taking to recover the stolen assets. A more detailed report will be made available to each of you by the end of the day. Rest assured, the company's core business remains strong and profitable. The fraud, while substantial, was contained. It represents a betrayal of trust, not a threat to our solvency. Robert Henderson leaned forward, his hands steepled in front of him. Clara, with all due respect, he said, his voice smooth and challenging, you're telling us that the COO of this company, your own husband, was a common thief, and this was happening under our noses for years. This is a governance nightmare. The stock will take a beating when the market opens. How do we know you are equipped to handle a crisis of this magnitude? Your involvement in day-to-day operations has been limited. It was the challenge I had expected, the insinuation that I was merely the namesake, the heiress, while the men handled the real business. My blood ran cold, but I did not let it show on my face. My involvement has been precisely what I allowed it to be, Robert, I replied, my gaze locking with his. And for the past 4 years, my primary involvement has been managing the investigation that you and the rest of this board missed. While you were approving Mr. Croft's quarterly reports, I was approving the invoices for the forensic accountants who were uncovering his crimes. I opened my portfolio again and took out a single sheet of paper. Let me give you just one example of what you missed. In the third quarter of last year, Mr. Croft authorized a payment of $2.3 million to a logistics contractor called Global Transport Solutions. The invoice was for supply chain optimization consulting. The expenditure was approved by the Finance Committee, on which you sit, Robert. What you didn't know, and what our investigation uncovered, is that Global Transport Solutions is a shell corporation registered in Delaware. Its sole director is a man named Charles Potts, who happens to be the maiden name of Julian Croft's mother. The company has no employees, no assets, and no other clients. The $2.3 million was transferred from GTS to an offshore account in the Bahamas 2 days after you approved the payment. The color drained from Henderson's face. The rest of the board was silent, their expressions ranging from shock to dawning horror. Bill Donovan looked at me with a newfound respect. That is just one of 17 such transactions we have fully documented. I continued, my voice like steel. So, to answer your question, Robert, am I equipped to handle this crisis? I am not just equipped. I am the only one who has been handling it. I have already implemented a 3-point plan. First, a full internal audit conducted by an external firm is underway to ensure there are no other leaks. Second, our communications team is working with a top crisis PR firm to manage the public narrative and reassure our investors. A press release will go out before the market opens, emphasizing the strength of our core business and framing this as a decisive action against criminal activity. Third, I am resuming my full duties as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. I looked around the table, my gaze sweeping over each member. The challenge had been met and utterly defeated. The power in the room had irrevocably shifted. This is a difficult day for Sterling Industries, I concluded. But it is not a fatal one. It is a day of reckoning. We are cutting out a cancer that has been growing in our midst. From this moment forward, we move on with integrity, transparency, and a renewed commitment to the values my father instilled in this company. Are there any other questions? There were none. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum filled with the force of my authority. After the meeting, I walked to the corner office, the CEO's office. It smelled of Julian, of his expensive cologne, and the cloying scent of the cigars he kept in the polished humidor on the credenza. The walls were adorned with abstract art he had purchased at inflated prices from a gallery owned by a friend, another one of his schemes, I was sure. His personal photos were on the desk. The two of us on a yacht, smiling a lie, him shaking hands with the governor, him on a golf course, the very picture of a captain of industry. A cold rage, pure and clean, washed over me. This was my space, my father's space, and he had contaminated it. Maria appeared at the doorway, a silent question in her eyes. "Maria," I said, my back to her as I stared out the window at the sprawling city. "Get a team from facilities up here. I want everything in this office that is not the original furniture packed up. The art, the photos, the humidor, all of it, put it in storage. I want the room cleared and cleaned. I want it to be an empty space by the end of the day." "Yes, Mrs. Sterling," she said. There was no hesitation in her voice. "And this arrived for you by messenger from Mr. Harding's office." She handed me a crisp envelope. I recognized the letterhead of a prominent and notoriously aggressive litigation firm. It was a letter from Julian's new lawyer. I tore it open. It was exactly what Arthur had predicted. A threat to sue me for defamation, libel, and slander for my malicious and false statements made at a private event. It demanded a public retraction and an apology, pending which they would seek damages to the tune of $50 million for the harm done to Mr. Croft's impeccable personal and professional reputation. I read the blustering, impotent words, and a small, humorless smile touched my lips. His impeccable reputation was currently the subject of a criminal investigation. The letter was a pathetic attempt to intimidate me, a desperate shot from a cannon that had already been dismantled. I handed the letter back to Maria. "Please have this scanned and sent to Mr. Harding. Then you can shred the original." "Right away," she said. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Mrs. Sterling, welcome back." I looked at her, and for the first time that day, my smile was genuine. "It's good to be back, Maria." When she was gone, I walked over to the massive mahogany desk, my father's desk. I ran my hand over the smooth, cool wood, a surface worn by decades of his hard work, his vision, his integrity. I sat down in the large leather chair, the one I had just reclaimed. It felt right. It felt like coming home. The battle was just beginning. Julian would fight, the media would feast, and the legal process would be long and ugly. But sitting there, in the quiet heart of my own empire, I was not afraid. The fear had been burned away, leaving only a cold, hard certainty. I had survived the lie. I would most certainly survive the truth. I picked up the phone to dial the head of our international division. There was work to be done. The days that followed were a blur of calculated, relentless work. I moved out of the anonymous hotel and into a secure, high-tech condominium in a different part of the city, a sterile glass box that held no memories. My life became a tightly scheduled loop between the condo, my lawyer's office, and the headquarters of Sterling Industries. The penthouse I had shared with Julian, with its sweeping views and poisoned memories, was sealed off, a crime scene in a very personal war, its contents to be cataloged and fought over by lawyers. I arrived at the office at dawn and left long after the sun had set, fueled by black coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. I was not just running a company, I was performing an exorcism. Julian's presence lingered everywhere. His name was on years of memos, his face smiled from team photos in the hallways, his decisions were embedded in the company's operational DNA. I began to purge him, methodically and without sentiment. My first week was spent in a series of marathon meetings with every department head. I listened more than I spoke, absorbing the state of the empire my father had left me. I found that Julian's corruption was not limited to outright theft. It was a more insidious rot of cronyism and mismanagement. He had promoted unqualified friends to key positions. He had greenlit vanity projects that were bleeding money. He had fostered a culture of fear, where loyalty to him was valued more than competence. One particularly glaring example was a project he had championed called Sterling Futura. It was a high-concept, automated logistics system that was supposed to revolutionize our warehouse operations. Julian had presented it to the board as his brainchild, a visionary leap into the future. He had poured over $30 million into its development over 2 years. I called a meeting with the head of engineering, a man named David Chen, a brilliant but quiet engineer who had been with the company for 20 years. In the Julian era, he had been sidelined, his cautious, data-driven approach dismissed as a lack of vision. "David," I began, sitting across from him in my newly cleansed, minimalist office. I've reviewed the financials for Sterling Futura. The numbers are alarming. We're massively over budget and 2 years behind schedule. Tell me what's really going on. No politics, just the truth. Chen hesitated for a moment, studying my face, clearly trying to determine if this was a trap. He had survived by staying quiet. I needed him to know that the rules had changed. The truth, Mrs. Sterling, he finally said, his voice low. The truth is the core concept is flawed. The AI software it relies on isn't stable. The hardware is custom-built by a company that gave Mr. Croft a very generous price, but it's unreliable. We spend more time fixing the prototypes than testing them. I wrote 3 separate reports detailing these issues over the past 18 months. I recommended we pause the project and reevaluate. I never saw those reports, I said, a knot of anger tightening in my stomach. I know, he replied. Mr. Croft told me my concerns were noted and that I should focus on being a team player. He said the project's success was critical for his vision of the company's future. His vision, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. He used our company's resources to build a monument to his own ego, and he silenced anyone who told him the foundation was cracked. I looked at David Chen, at the weary frustration in his eyes. He was one of my father's guys, a man dedicated to logic and quality. What would you do, David, if it were your decision? A spark of the old engineer, the problem solver, returned to his eyes. I'd salvage what we can. The robotics hardware has some value. We could sell the patents or adapt them for a smaller, more focused application. But the central AI platform, it's a money pit. We need to cut our losses and shut it down. We should reinvest the capital into upgrading our existing systems, the ones that actually work. Do it, I said without hesitation. Draw up a proposal with a full cost-benefit analysis. I want it on my desk by Friday. From now on, this company will be making decisions based on data, not dreams. The relief on his face was palpable. It was a small victory, but it was a start. It was a signal to the entire company that the era of empty charisma was over and the era of competence had begun. The legal battle, however, was a different kind of beast. It wasn't about logic, it was about attrition. Julian's lawyers were masters of obstruction. They filed motion after motion, challenging every request for documents, contesting every statement, trying to bury us in a blizzard of paperwork. The day of my deposition arrived a month after the party. It was held in a sterile conference room at Julian's lawyer's firm. The air was thick with a tense, adversarial energy. I sat on one side of a long, polished table with Mr. Harding and another lawyer from his team. On the other side sat Julian, looking thin and haggard but with a defiant glint in his eye, and his lead attorney, a notoriously ruthless litigator named Wallace Thorne. A court stenographer sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over her machine. Thorne began with a series of perfunctory questions, establishing my identity, my role at the company, my history with Julian. His tone was deceptively mild, lulling, but I knew it was a performance. Mrs. Sterling, he said, leaning forward, you allege that my client, your husband of 10 years, defrauded your company. Is that correct? That is correct, I answered, my voice calm and measured. And you announced these very serious, career-ending allegations at what was supposed to be a celebration of your marriage, a party in front of 300 of your friends and colleagues. It was the most efficient way to inform all interested parties of the change in Mr. Croft's status, I said coolly. Efficient. Thorne's eyebrows shot up. Or was it the most theatrical? The most humiliating. Did you enjoy it, Mrs. Sterling? Did you enjoy destroying your husband's reputation in such a public fashion? My intention was to protect my company's assets and reputation, Mr. Thorne. Julian's actions are what destroyed his own reputation. So you deny that there was any personal animosity in your actions. This had nothing to do with the fact that you had discovered your husband was having an affair. He slid one of the Miami photographs across the table. It landed face up in front of me, Julian and Tiffany frozen in their moment of carefree betrayal. I did not look at it. I kept my eyes fixed on Thorn. The infidelity was emotionally painful. The multi-million-dollar fraud was a threat to my company's existence. I am capable of distinguishing between the two. The actions I took were based on his financial crimes, not his personal ones. How convenient, Thorn sneered. So you were a loving, devoted wife right up until the moment you decided to publicly crucify him. I was a trusting wife, I corrected him, a trust that Julian exploited for nearly a decade. Let's talk about that trust, Thorn said, changing tactics. You are the majority shareholder and chairman of Sterling Industries, are you not? I am. And you were for the entire duration of your marriage. Yes. So you held the ultimate authority in the company. All major decisions, ultimately, had to be approved by you or the board you controlled. That is the structure, yes, I said, seeing where he was going. So for 8 years, as you allege, Mr. Croft was committing this massive fraud. He was supposedly stealing millions of dollars. And you, the chairman, the ultimate authority, you claim you knew nothing about it. He leaned back in his chair with a look of theatrical disbelief. So which is it, Mrs. Sterling? Were you an incompetent CEO who was asleep at the wheel while your company was being robbed blind? Or are you a liar, making up these allegations now to punish your husband for being unfaithful? The trap was set. He was trying to force me into a corner to admit either negligence or malice, but I had prepared for this. I had spent hours with Harding, role-playing every possible line of attack. I met Thorn's gaze and did not blink. Neither, Mr. Thorn. I was a victim of a sophisticated and deliberate deception by a man I loved and trusted. A man who was an expert at manipulation. He exploited my trust, not just as his wife, but as his business partner. He presented forged documents, he buried fraudulent transactions within legitimate-looking reports, he lied to my face, to the board, and to our auditors. What you call incompetence, a court of law will call criminal concealment. I saw a flicker of frustration in Thorn's eyes. I had not taken the bait. Mr. Harding gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The questioning went on for hours. Thorn dragged me through my personal life, my relationship with my father, my social activities. He tried to portray me as a cold, distant ice queen who was more interested in her inheritance than her husband. I answered every question calmly, sticking to the facts, refusing to be drawn into emotional reactions. Julian sat beside his lawyer, a silent, smoldering presence. Occasionally, he would lean over and whisper in Thorn's ear. At one point, during a question about our early, happier years, my gaze met his across the table. He gave me a look of such profound, venomous hatred that it was like being struck. In his eyes, he was the victim. He had earned that money, he deserved the life he had built, and I had stolen it from him. The depth of his delusion was bottomless. The most difficult part of the day came when Thorn brought up my father. Your father, Thomas Sterling, was a legendary businessman, wasn't he? He was a great man, I said, and he trusted you to carry on his legacy. He left you in control of his entire empire. He did. Do you think he would be proud of you today, Mrs. Sterling? Proud that his company is the subject of a public scandal. Proud that the daughter he raised is airing her dirty laundry in the tabloids and dragging the family name through the mud. The question was a low blow designed to wound me to make me emotional. For a split second, it worked. A lump formed in my throat. I thought of my father's bust in the lobby, of his unwavering integrity. But then I remembered his favorite saying, the one he had drilled into me since I was a child. The truth has a price, Clara, but a lie costs you everything. I took a sip of water, composing myself. My father taught me that integrity is the most valuable asset a person or a company can have. He would be devastated to know that the man I married betrayed that value. But he would be proud that I am doing whatever it takes, no matter how public or painful, to restore it. He would not tolerate a thief in his company, and neither will I. My voice did not waver. The answer was clear, final, and from the heart. Wallace Thorn had nothing left. He shuffled his papers and, with a tight, angry voice, said, "No further questions at this time." I walked out of that room feeling utterly drained, as if I had run a marathon. But I also felt a sense of clean, hard-won victory. I had faced the enemy, and I had not broken. That night, alone in my condo, the facade finally cracked. The strength I had projected all day crumbled, and I allowed myself to grieve. I didn't cry for Julian, the man he had become. I cried for the man I thought he was. I cried for the 10 years I had lost, for the trust I had given so freely and that had been so utterly betrayed. I cried for the fool I had been. The tears were a necessary release, a cleansing of the last remnants of the woman I used to be. When they were gone, I felt a profound emptiness, but it was not the emptiness of despair. It was the emptiness of a vessel that has been cleared of poison, ready to be filled with something new, something real. I had survived the deposition. I had survived the truth. Now, I just had to survive the long, grueling war ahead. The war, I soon discovered, would be fought on multiple fronts. The legal front was a slow, grinding siege of motions and discovery. The corporate front was a campaign of restoration, of rooting out the last vestiges of Julian's corrupting influence. But the most public and ugliest front was the one I hadn't fully anticipated, the battle for the story. A week after my deposition, Julian, who had been uncharacteristically silent, made his move. He gave an exclusive, primetime television interview to a journalist known for her soft-focus, sympathetic profiles. I watched it from my condo, a glass of ice water in my hand, as Beatrice paced behind the sofa like a caged tiger. The setting was carefully chosen. Not a lawyer's office, but a borrowed, book-lined study with a crackling fire, designed to project an image of warmth and wounded intellectualism. Julian was dressed not in a power suit, but in a soft cashmere sweater. He looked tired, sad, and deeply wronged. "I loved my wife," he began, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed sorrow. "I dedicated 10 years of my life to her and to her family's company. Did I make mistakes? Yes, I was unfaithful, and it is the greatest regret of my life. I broke her heart, and she has every right to be angry. But this is not about anger. This is about control." He leaned forward, his eyes finding the camera, creating an illusion of intimate confession. "Clara is a brilliant woman, but she has always been isolated by her wealth. She lives in a world where she can buy anything, control anything. When she found out about my affair, she couldn't control my feelings, so she decided to control everything else. She decided to destroy me. She has used the full force of her family's fortune to paint me as a master criminal, to take my home, my career, my reputation. She is trying to erase me." The journalist, her face a mask of concerned empathy, chimed in. "And the fraud allegations. Your wife's lawyers claim you stole millions from the company." Julian managed a sad, weary smile. "Every financial decision I made was for the benefit of Sterling Industries. I took risks, yes, I was aggressive. I wanted to grow the company for her, for our future. Clara was never interested in the details of the business. She signed off on every report, every expenditure. Now, her lawyers are twisting those aggressive business decisions into something sinister. They are criminalizing success because my wife is angry that I strayed. This isn't a fraud case. It's the most expensive, most brutal divorce in Chicago history." It was a masterful performance. He had taken the truth, his affair, my wealth, his business decisions, and woven it into a compelling tapestry of lies. He was no longer the villain. He was the flawed but loving husband, the brilliant risk-taker, being crushed under the heel of a cold, vindictive, and unimaginably powerful woman. He was David, and I was the corporate Goliath. "Turn it off," Beatrice snarled, snatching the remote. "I can't watch any more of that self-pitying, manipulative garbage. He's good, I'll give him that. He's very, very good at lying." My phone buzzed. It was Arthur. "I hope you're not watching this." "I saw enough," I said, my voice tight. "What's our response?" "Our response is to do nothing," he said calmly. "We don't get into a public slanging match. We don't respond to his emotional narrative. We stick to the facts and we present them in court. Let him have the airwaves. We'll have the verdict." It was the correct legal advice, but it was infuriating. I had an overwhelming urge to fight back, to release the damning evidence, to expose him for the liar he was. But I had to trust the strategy. I had to let him talk, let him build his narrative of victimhood, knowing that every lie he told on national television was another thread in the noose he was tying for himself. The interview did its damage. The tide of public sympathy, which had been cautiously on my side, began to turn. The online comments were now filled with support for the poor husband. I started getting sympathetic looks from strangers, the kind you give to a grieving widow, only I was the one being mourned. They thought he had broken my heart, and I had broken his career in a fit of pique. The impact at the office was more subtle, but just as corrosive. I could feel a new layer of uncertainty among the employees. Julian's narrative gave a foothold to his remaining loyalists. One of these was Mark Renshaw, the vice president of sales. Mark was a slick, charismatic man in his late 40s, a Julian hire who had always treated me with a cloying, condescending courtesy. His sales numbers were good, but his expense reports were notoriously creative, something Julian had always overlooked. I had suspected for weeks that Renshaw was a leak, a Trojan horse inside my own company. After Julian's interview, I knew I had to act. I asked Maria to pull all of Renshaw's phone and email records for the past month. The IT department, now fiercely loyal to me, delivered them within an hour. The records showed a dozen calls to a burner phone I knew belonged to Julian and a series of coded emails discussing market instability and leadership vacuums. He was feeding my ex-husband internal information. The next morning, I called Renshaw to my office. He strolled in with his usual cocksure swagger, a smile plastered on his face. "Clara, good morning," he said, calling me by my first name, a subtle act of disrespect he had picked up from Julian. "What can I do for you?" I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Mark, have a seat. I wanted to discuss the third quarter sales projections." We spent 10 minutes talking about business. I let him talk, let him boast about a new contract he was close to landing. I wanted him comfortable. I wanted him to think this was a normal meeting. Finally, I leaned back in my chair. "Mark, do you find our new IT security protocols to be sufficient?" The question caught him off guard. Yes, I suppose so. Everything seems to be working fine." "Good," I said, "because they are certainly very thorough. For instance, they log all external communications from company devices. It's fascinating, the kind of data you can collect. Call durations, email recipients, even the GPS location of company cell phones." I picked up a thin file from my desk and opened it. "For example, I can see that you made a 3-minute call yesterday at 5:17 p.m. from your company cell phone while you were at a bar on Rush Street. The call was to a prepaid, unregistered number. A number that, coincidentally, has only ever been used to communicate with a handful of people, including my husband's divorce attorney." The blood drained from Mark Renshaw's face. His swagger evaporated, leaving behind a pale, sweaty fear. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You've been with this company for 6 years, Mark," I continued, my voice soft but relentless. "In that time, you have been well compensated. You have a generous salary, a substantial bonus package, and a company car. In return for that, this company asks for one thing: loyalty. Not to a person, not to a former executive with a grievance, but to the company itself. You have violated that trust. You have actively worked against the best interests of Sterling Industries by sharing confidential information with an adverse party in a legal dispute." I closed the file. "You have 2 options. Option 1 is that I fire you for cause, effective immediately. We will have security escort you from the building. We will contest your unemployment claim, and my lawyers will send you a letter reminding you of the non-disclosure agreement you signed and the severe financial penalties for violating it. Your career in this industry will be over." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. "Option 2, I said, "is that you sign a letter of resignation, effective immediately. You will cite personal reasons. You will forfeit your severance package, but we will not legally pursue the breach of your NDA, provided your cooperation is absolute from this moment forward. You will hand over your company phone, laptop, and keys. You will leave this building quietly. and you will never speak to Julian Croft or his representatives again." He stared at me, his mind racing. He was a salesman, always looking for the angle, the negotiation, but there was none to be had. He saw in my eyes that I was not bluffing. "I'll resign," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "A wise choice," I said. I slid a pre-written resignation letter and a pen across the desk. "Maria will show you out." He signed the letter with a trembling hand, his career at Sterling Industries ending not with a bang, but with the scratch of a pen. He stood up, a broken, defeated man, and walked out of my office without another word. The message was sent. The purge was continuing. That evening, Bill Donovan, the CFO and my father's old friend, stopped by my office just as I was packing up. "I heard about Mark Renshaw," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "The sharks are starting to smell the blood in the water. You handled it well, decisively." "I'm just doing what needs to be done, Bill," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "You're doing more than that," he said, his voice softer than I was used to hearing from him. "You're becoming the leader this company needs. You know, your father, he always worried about you. He worried that he had made things too easy for you, that you had never been truly tested. He would have hated what you're going through, but he would be so damn proud of the woman you've become." His words, so simple and sincere, hit me with a surprising force. I had been so focused on the fight, on the strategy, on survival, that I hadn't stopped to think about my father in that way. All this time, I had been trying to protect his legacy. It had never occurred to me that I was also building my own. Just as Bill was leaving, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harding. His voice was brisk, energized. "Clara, I have good news. The judge just ruled on Julian's motion to unfreeze his assets." My heart skipped a beat, and she denied it. Emphatically. Her ruling stated that there is overwhelming preliminary evidence to suggest the assets were procured through fraudulent means, and that unfreezing them would pose a significant flight risk. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. It was the first major, concrete victory in the legal war. "What does this mean practically?" I asked. "It means he's broke," Harding said with grim satisfaction. "His high-priced lawyers are now working pro bono until he can figure out a way to pay them. It means he can't fund his television appearances or his PR campaign. It means the walls are closing in. He's going to get very, very desperate." I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the city lights, the same lights I had looked at with Julian on our balcony what felt like a lifetime ago. He was right about one thing, I thought. I was alone with my money. But my money was not just a fortune, it was a fortress. And from within its walls, I would win this war. The news of the asset freeze was a powerful shot of adrenaline, a confirmation that the system, however slow and grinding, was working. But Mr. Harding's final words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. He is going to get very, very desperate. The thought was a cold stone in the pit of my stomach. I had known Julian as a manipulator, a liar, and a thief. I had never known him as a desperate man. I had no idea what that man was capable of. I threw myself even deeper into my work, using the long hours as a shield against the gnawing anxiety. I finalized the plan to shut down the disastrous Sterling Futura project, reallocating the capital to David Chen's pragmatic and data-driven upgrades. The decision sent a shockwave of relief and renewed purpose through the engineering and operations departments. For the first time in years, they felt heard. It was a small, crucial step in rebuilding the company's culture from the ground up, moving it from a cult of personality to a meritocracy. The legal front, however, remained a quagmire. Julian's lawyers, clearly working on a contingency basis now, became even more obstructionist. They buried us in frivolous discovery requests, demanding access to my personal diaries from boarding school, my college transcripts, my private medical records. They were on a fishing expedition, hoping to find any scrap of information they could use to embarrass me or build their narrative of my instability. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts, designed to exhaust and distract. It was during one of these grueling document review sessions with my legal team that the next front in the war opened up, from a direction I never would have anticipated. Mr. Harding's assistant buzzed him on the intercom, her voice tinged with a rare note of excitement. "Mr. Harding, I have a Miss Tiffany Dubois on the line for you. She says it's a matter of the utmost urgency regarding the Croft case." She was very insistent. The room went silent. I looked at Harding, whose professional poker face didn't so much as flicker. Tiffany, the mistress, the woman from the photograph. The name felt like a foreign object in my mouth. "Put her through to my private line," Harding said calmly. He gestured for his associate to leave the room, but he looked at me. "Do you want to stay, Clara?" My first instinct was a visceral, reptilian no. I wanted nothing to do with this woman. She was a symbol of my humiliation, a walking, talking reminder of the lie my life had been. But the CEO in me, the cold, strategic general I was becoming, overrode the impulse. This was a development, and I needed to understand all developments. "I'll stay," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. Harding picked up the receiver and put the call on a discreet speakerphone. "This is Lawrence Harding." A young woman's voice, high and laced with a panicked energy, filled the quiet office. "Mr. Harding, oh, thank God, my name is Tiffany Dubois. I was with Julian Croft. I'm the one in the pictures." "I'm aware of who you are, Ms. Dubois," Harding said, his tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" "It's what I can do for you," she said, her words tumbling over each other. "For Mrs. Sterling, look, Julian, he's a liar. He told me he and his wife had been separated for years, that the marriage was just a business arrangement. He promised me everything. He said we were going to be together, that he was going to leave her. He bought me a condo, he was paying for my classes, he said he'd fund a showcase for my acting." Her voice broke, a raw sob catching in her throat. "Then, last week, he cut me off, completely. The money stopped. He called me screaming, saying it was all Clara's fault that she'd frozen his accounts. The next day, I got an eviction notice. The condo was rented, not owned. The lease was in his name, and he hasn't paid it. I have nowhere to go. He used me. He used me, and now he's thrown me away like garbage." I sat frozen in my chair, listening to the architect of my personal pain describe her own. The irony was acidic. Julian, the master of using and discarding, had done it again. "I'm sorry to hear of your difficulties, Ms. Dubois," Harding said, his voice still perfectly even. "But I'm not sure how this is a legal matter for my client." "'Cause I have things," she said, her voice rising with a desperate intensity. "I have information. He wasn't just cheating on her with me, there were others. And he talked, Mr. Harding. He bragged. About his business deals, about how he ran circles around the old men on the board, about how Clara was too naive to understand the complex strategies he was using. He kept a second laptop at my place, a personal one. He said it was for things he didn't want on the company servers. He took it with him when he left, but he forgot the backup drive. A little silver thumb drive. He was always so paranoid about losing his data. I still have it." My blood turned to ice. A backup drive. Julian's entire digital life, his real digital life, could be on that drive. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "Ms. Dubois," Harding said, his voice now carrying a new weight, "I must advise you that you should not access or tamper with that drive in any way. Where are you right now?" "I'm at a coffee shop. I'm scared to go back to the condo. Julian might show up." He sounded unhinged on the phone. "Stay where you are," Harding instructed. "I am going to send a private courier to your location. His name is Michael. He will be there in 20 minutes. I want you to place the thumb drive in an envelope, seal it, and give it to him. He will give you a receipt. Do you understand?" "What's in it for me?" she asked, a sliver of the transactional woman she had to be peeking through the panic. "I need a place to live. I need money. I can't go back to waiting tables." "Michael will also have an envelope for you," Harding said smoothly. "It will contain $10,000 in cash to help with your immediate relocation and expenses. Any further compensation will be contingent on the authenticity and usefulness of the information you have provided. Do we have an agreement?" There was a pause, then a sniffle. "Yes, okay, yes." Harding got the address of the coffee shop, repeated the instructions, and then ended the call. He turned to me, his face impassive, but his eyes were gleaming. It was the look of a hunter who had just seen the prize buck walk directly into his sights. "Well," he said, "that is what we in the legal profession call a gift from the gods of litigation." I said nothing. My mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Part of me felt a grim, righteous satisfaction. Julian's own sordid behavior had created a new and powerful weapon for me, but another, deeper part of me was revolted. The thought of using this woman, of forming an unholy alliance with my husband's mistress, felt like a contamination. It felt like sinking to his level. "We can't trust her," I said, the words coming out clipped and harsh. "This could be a setup. A plant from Julian to entrap us." "It's a possibility," Harding conceded. "A small one. Her story has the ring of truth." The desperation of a woman who has just had her entire world pulled out from under her is very difficult to fake. And the risk is minimal. We are not paying her for testimony. We are compensating her for physical evidence that she has a right to possess. We will have our forensic team analyze the drive. If it's a trap, we'll know. If it's real, it could end this, Clara. It could provide irrefutable proof of criminal intent, enough for the DA to press charges immediately. It could be the key to avoiding a long, drawn-out civil trial. He was right, of course. Strategically, it was a no-brainer. But emotionally, it felt like a compromise of a fundamental part of myself. I had fought this war with clean hands, using the truth and the law. This felt dirty. "I don't like it," I said. "You don't have to like it," Harding replied, his tone softening slightly. "You just have to decide if you want to win. Julian is not fighting a clean fight. He is using lies, innuendo, and the media to attack your character. He is fighting a war of annihilation. Sometimes, to defeat an enemy like that, you have to be willing to use the weapons they leave lying on the battlefield." I thought of my father. I thought of his unwavering integrity. What would he do? But my father had never faced an enemy like this. He had never had to fight a war in his own bedroom, in his own heart. The rules he had lived by felt like they belonged to a different, more honorable world. "All right," I said, the word tasting like defeat and victory all at once. "Get the drive." The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. The courier retrieved the envelope. The drive was delivered to a secure forensics lab that Harding used. A team of tech wizards began the delicate process of cracking the encryption and creating a mirror image of the contents. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't eat. I paced my condo, haunted by the voice of the woman who had helped destroy my marriage and might now be the key to my salvation. The call from Harding came the following afternoon. "We're in," he said, and I could hear the restrained triumph in his voice. "Clara, it's all here. It's worse than we ever imagined." He began to read from the forensic team's initial report. The drive contained Julian's entire shadow life. There were hidden ledgers detailing every single fraudulent transaction, complete with notes on how he had covered his tracks. There were email exchanges with his brother, conspiring to set up the offshore accounts. There were flirtatious, damning text messages with not just Tiffany, but at least 3 other women, all of whom were receiving some form of financial support funded by Sterling Industries. But the most chilling discovery was a file buried deep in a folder labeled contingencies. It was a detailed plan. A plan for how to systematically devalue Sterling Industries, break it up, and sell off its most profitable divisions to a consortium of asset strippers he had been secretly courting. He had been planning to destroy my father's life's work from the inside out. He hadn't just been stealing from the company, he had been plotting its murder. And at the end of the document was his endgame, a draft of a prenuptial agreement he was planning to have me sign under the guise of estate planning, an agreement that would have given him 50% of everything in a divorce. He hadn't just wanted my money. He had wanted my entire world. I listened, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. The betrayal I had felt before was a shallow cut compared to this. This was a chasm. This was a revelation of a soullessness so profound it was almost incomprehensible. He had never loved me. He had never even liked me. I was not a person to him. I was a target, a mark, a 10-year project. "There's one more thing, Clara," Harding said, his voice grave. "In that same folder there are a series of audio files, Recordings. It seems Julian had a habit of secretly recording his phone calls. One of them is a call he made to Wallace Thorne, his lawyer, the day after the party. My breath caught in my chest, a recorded call with his own lawyer. "Play it," I whispered. Harding pressed a button, and Julian's voice, raw with rage and panic, filled my ear. "She knows, Wally, she knows everything. The West Loop deal, the offshores, everything. How is this possible?" Then I heard Thorne's calm, reptilian voice. "Calm down, Julian. She has suspicions. She has no hard proof. We will bury her in litigation. We will paint her as a hysterical, vengeful shrew. We will bleed her dry until she gives up." "She won't give up," Julian shouted. "You don't know her. She's her father's daughter. She's a bulldog. We need to find something on her, something to make her back down. Anything. An old boyfriend, a business mistake, anything." There was a pause. Then Thorne's voice dropped, low and conspiratorial. "There might be something. Thomas Sterling's final years. His health was delicate. There were rumors of cognitive decline, moments of confusion. If we can create a narrative that Clara took advantage of his weakened state, that she had him sign over more control than he understood, we could challenge the very foundation of her authority. We could argue that she stole the company from him, not that you stole it from her." A wave of black, icy fury washed over me. They were going to tarnish my father's memory. They were going to use his final, vulnerable years, the most painful period of my life, as a weapon against me. It was the lowest, most despicable thing I could imagine. "That's it," I said, my voice a deadly whisper. "That's enough." The last shred of my hesitation, my moral quandary about using Tiffany's evidence, was incinerated in that moment. This was no longer a legal battle. This was a fight for my father's soul. "Harding," I said, my voice now clear and cold as a winter morning, "send a copy of that recording and a summary of the drive's contents to the DA's office, and send a copy directly to Wallace Thorne. Let him know that his conversation with his client is no longer privileged. Let him know that we know the war is over. This is an unconditional surrender." The airdrop of the thumb drive's contents into the heart of the enemy camp had the explosive, disorienting effect of a flashbang grenade. For 2 days, there was a deafening silence from Julian's side. No more blustering letters from his lawyers, no more leaks to the press, no more self-pitying public statements. It was the unnerving quiet of an army in full, panicked retreat. On the 3rd day, the surrender began. The first white flag came from Wallace Thorne. He called Mr. Harding personally. I was in Harding's office, and he put the call on speakerphone. Thorne's voice, which had been so full of arrogant aggression during my deposition, was now a clipped, professional monotone, stripped of all its bluster. "Lawrence," he began, dispensing with the usual pleasantries. "This call is made with my client's full knowledge and consent. It is a preliminary inquiry into the possibility of a global settlement regarding all civil and domestic matters between our clients." A global settlement, the legalese for a complete and total capitulation. "We are always open to discussions that are in our client's best interest, Wallace," Harding replied, his own voice a study in cool neutrality. He was a master at this, at never revealing the winning hand until the final card was played. "My client is prepared to agree to all terms of the original divorce filing," Thorne said, the words sounding like they were being forced from his throat. "He will make no claim on any assets, marital or otherwise. He will relinquish any and all shares or options in Sterling Industries. He will sign the non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreements as written. In return, he asks for 2 things." "Go on," Harding said. "First, a one-time lump sum payment of $500,000 for relocation and to start a new life." I almost laughed out loud. After stealing millions, after plotting to destroy my company, he wanted $500,000 to go away quietly. The audacity was breathtaking. "And second," Thorne continued, "he wants Mrs. Sterling's assurance that she will not actively encourage the district attorney's office to pursue criminal charges." There it was, the real fear. It was no longer about the money, it was about staying out of prison. Harding looked at me. I gave a single, sharp shake of my head. He turned his attention back to the phone. "Wallace," he said, and for the first time, a hint of steel entered his voice. "Let me be perfectly clear. The matter of criminal charges is, and has always been, in the hands of the district attorney. My client is a material witness in an ongoing investigation, and she will continue to cooperate fully and truthfully with law enforcement. There will be no assurances. That would be tantamount to obstruction of justice, and you know it." He paused, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. "As for the financial request, the answer is no. There will be no payment, not $1. Mr. Croft will walk away with the clothes on his back and the watch your client was foolish enough to accept as a gift. He will sign our agreements, or we will proceed with the civil trial. And you and I both know what the contents of that thumb drive will do to your client in front of a jury. The word you're looking for is settlement. It's mercy." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the grinding of Wallace Thorne's teeth, the humiliation of a top litigator being so utterly outmaneuvered. "I will convey the terms to my client," he said finally, his voice flat. He hung up without another word. "He'll take the deal," Harding said, a thin, satisfied smile touching his lips. "He has no choice." The next few weeks were a flurry of legal activity as the machinery of the surrender ground its way to a conclusion. Julian signed everything. The divorce papers, the civil settlement, the NDA. He signed away his claim to our homes, our cars, our art, our life. He became, in the eyes of the law, a ghost in my history. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt not triumph, but a profound and hollow quiet. There was no celebration, no champagne. The war was over, but the battlefield was my own life, and the scars would take a long time to fade. I had won. I had saved my company. I had protected my father's legacy. But the cost had been immense. My innocence, my ability to trust, the 10 years I had invested in a lie, those were losses that could never be recovered. A month later, the final blow fell. The district attorney's office, armed with the irrefutable evidence from the thumb drive and a mountain of corroborating documents from our investigation, indicted Julian Croft on 12 counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. I was in my office when the news broke. Maria came in quietly and simply turned on the small television on my credenza. The local news was showing live footage from outside the downtown courthouse. There he was, Julian Croft. The man who had entered my life a decade ago as a charming, handsome suitor was now a haggard, broken figure in a wrinkled suit, being hustled through a scrum of reporters by a low-rent criminal defense attorney. His face, once so full of confident charisma, was now a mask of fear and shame. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. As they pushed him into the back of a taxi, his eyes flickered toward the camera for a moment, and they were the eyes of a stranger. There was nothing left of the man I had married. Perhaps there never had been. I watched until the taxi pulled away, disappearing into the city traffic. Then I asked Maria to turn off the television. I swiveled my chair to face the window, looking out at the city my family had helped to build. It was a clear, cold day. The sky was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. In the months and years that followed, I rebuilt. I rebuilt my company, promoting David Chen to COO and empowering a new generation of leaders who valued integrity and competence over charisma. We became stronger, leaner, and more profitable than ever before. I rebuilt my life. I sold the cold, modern condo and bought a beautiful old brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. I filled it not with expensive, abstract art, but with books, comfortable furniture, and the laughter of friends. Beatrice and Arthur became my family. I started a charitable foundation in my father's name, dedicated to providing legal aid to victims of elder financial abuse. I was using my fortune not as a shield, but as a tool for good. I never saw Julian again. I heard through the grapevine that he took a plea deal, agreeing to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a lighter sentence. He served 4 years in a low-security federal prison. When he got out, he disappeared. I imagine he is out there somewhere, a ghost of a man, trying to hustle his way through a new life, forever looking over his shoulder. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I will think of him. I think of the 10 years lost to his deception, but the anger and the grief have faded, replaced by a quiet, steely gratitude. The pain he caused was immense, but the strength I discovered in myself was greater. He married me for my money, believing it was the source of my power. He was wrong. My power was not in my bank account, it was in my blood. It was the legacy of my father's integrity and my own unbreakable will to survive. He thought he was the author of my story, but he was just a chapter. A dark, painful, and ultimately necessary chapter. And now, the rest of the book was mine to write.